Hey everyone, welcome back. It's been a little while. We had a bit of a unscheduled break the past couple of weeks. I had taken a week of vacation, and when I came back, my CPU had decided that it no longer wanted to work. So had to replace that, but we're back up and running and ready to hop back into things. Before we get started, I just want everyone to know that currently under the community tab on the channel, there is a poll that you can vote for the tire tread option of your choice that you would like to see on the Octane. The Toyos currently have a pretty strong lead, but there's still plenty of time for those of us on Team Falcon or Team KO2 to come back and win this thing. Regardless, get your votes in now because I plan on ordering the winning option this upcoming week. That being said, we're going to jump into a combined video for build days 3 and 4. We're going to talk about the state of the chassis and where we go from here. We're going to start out with the rear third of the Octane flipped over, hopefully for the only time that ever happens, but there were a couple of small tubes that we didn't get around to welding in the previous couple of build days, but we can knock them out pretty easily now. We also have a couple of diagonal square tubes that we're going to use to mount the rear tow rod tabs to. We'll assemble the tabs along with the spherical bearing to position it initially and tack it in place. And then we'll come back and disassemble the joint and apply full beads. Next, we're going to move on to the shock mounts, and this is really where we're going to focus for the rest of the video. The tubes, bushings, and plates here make up a solid shock, which is really just a dummy part that's used to make our life a little bit easier for welding and alignment purposes. It's supposed to simulate the shock tower being compressed a little bit, so that way when you weld in the mounting plates that this attaches to, everything sits in the neutral ride height expected position. And while these certainly help make our life a little bit easier, there is still a lot of work involved with filing everything to fit correctly. But here you can see we've got the first corner assembly kind of put together. We can attach that to both the upper and lower control arm mounts. That'll lock us into position as to where we want the shock mount to be, and we can use a couple of gussets made from some square tubing to fit in between the chassis and the mount to hold everything in place. These gussets sort of just get cut to fit, shoved in place, and welded up. There's a lot of surface area to cover and a lot of tight spaces to work around, but nothing Tillman can't do, so let's just let him have at it for a little bit. Once both rear shocks were complete, we could unbolt the control arms and cut out the cross tube that's used for positioning but would otherwise get in the way of the actual shock when installed. Once we cut through both sides, we can release the solid shock, and then we can touch up the inside with a flap disc. Getting the full rear suspension together should be one of the things on our to-do list for next week, but for now we're going to repeat the process with the front section of the chassis. If the rear wasn't time consuming and difficult enough, then the front was another beast in and of itself. You can see sort of throughout some of these clips, I'm in the background with the angle grinder sort of doing what felt like a whole lot of nothing, but just trying to grind some of these surfaces to make everything fit better. It really took some time to get the lower control arms. We had a little bit of movement in the front section in the lower control arm mounts when full beads were applied. Working around the round tubing is also a little bit more challenging than the square. So it definitely took us a little bit more time to get everything in position where we thought it should be, and then to get started with welding. I had originally anticipated getting the cockpit put together as well, but that's just not something we were able to get to this time, but is definitely my priority in the next couple of weeks, so we can actually get this thing rolling. We did take some time to also weld in the tabs that go for the steering rack mount. These are sort of unique with how the rack has to be angled in order for the steering shafts to be oriented correctly. And so in addition to the tabs, we have these machined aluminum mounts. And just like the rear tow rod tabs, we're just going to tack it in this state before removing the rack and then applying full beads to the rest. That's all we have for this week. It's a really iterative process, going back and forth trying to make these shock mounts fit up correctly. You can see all the other little gussets and tubes that go in place as well. They have to really be custom profiled to fit each case. It was really something that, with how far along we are with the chassis, this is kind of where all of your tolerances start to stack up, and where all the assumptions you made in earlier parts and whatever movement you may have had during welding kind of all comes into play now with how these last couple of mounts are being put in. So certainly something difficult that we're going to have to continue to work out at the start of the next couple of build days, but we're making good progress, and I've got some teasers put together for what this thing's going to look like here pretty soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week.